I'm Mr. Unstrom. This is my FRQ ample reserves redo video. The first question is asking, using sketch notes, explain in detail why the Federal Reserve had to move to an ample reserve system. So, before the 2008 financial crisis, the Federal Reserve used a scarce reserve system where banks held very small excess reserves. The Fed had to constantly adjust the supply of reserves through open market operations to keep the federal funds rate at its target. After the crisis, the Fed increased bank reserves, which created ample reserves. Banks had far more reserves than required. With the huge reserves, small changes in supply no longer affected interest rates much. The old system became ineffective because reserves were no longer scarce, and the Fed needed a way to control interest rates without constantly adjusting reserve supply. So they moved to an ample reserve system. Question 2 is asking to draw the ample reserves graph and explain how the Federal Reserve controls the federal funds rate to get within their target range. So first, we need to draw the graph. The policy rate is also the federal funds rate. So how the Federal Reserve controls the federal funds rate to get within their target range is if they raise the interest on reserve, which is right here, if they raise that, it will raise the federal funds rate and move up to a point up here. And if they lower the interest on reserves, then it will lower the federal funds rate. So instead of changing the reserve supply, the federal funds adjust the administered rates. To explain how the Federal Reserve could close a recessionary gap through changing their target range, they would lower their interest rates on reserve, which would then increase consumption and investment, causing the demand to increase, then fixing the recessionary gap. Moving on to the ample reserve FRQ attached, it's asking to just draw a graph of the aggregate supply and demand where the actual unemployment rate is lower than the natural rate of unemployment, and label the price level and outputs. So we'll just draw that. Because the actual unemployment rate is lower than the natural rate of unemployment, it will create a positive output gap, and then label the current price level and the current output level. That'd be right here. So this would be labeled Y1, and then this would be the current price level, which is just PL1. And then also labeled the full employment output level, that would just be right here as YF. Question B says, assume the country's banking system has ample reserves. What monetary policy action should the country's central bank use to move the economy towards its long-run equilibrium? To close the inflationary gap, the central bank should use contractionary monetary policy. This would increase the interest on reserve rate. If they lowered their interest on reserves, that would cause the investment and consumption to decrease, shifting the aggregate demand to the left, then reaching their full employment. Question C is asking to draw a correctly labeled graph of the country's reserve market and then to show how the central bank's action to move the economy towards its long-run equilibrium affects the policy rate in the short run. So if they're increasing their interest on reserve rates, this will go up. And then in the short run, that would cause the policy rates to increase.